Well, hello, and welcome to Inside the Admissions Committee. It is my pleasure to have you join us coming in live from Durham. Some affectionately call it the Bull City, or maybe even the City of Medicine. My name is Jessica Brown, a member of the admissions team here at Fuqua, and I'm really excited to have you join us. I have a wonderful panel of my colleagues here, and we're going to share helpful information with you to craft a competitive application. Not just to break down each component of the application, but to really give you lots of good information for you to say, you know what, I have what I need, I am ready to submit my application, and to do it with confidence. So let's go ahead and get the conversation started. I'm going to start with my colleague Suzette, and Suzette, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and also share a random fact.
Hi everyone, my name is Suzette Feller, Assistant Director of Admissions working on the daytime MBA recruitment team here. I have been at Fuqua for just about a year and a half, and my fun fact is that I grew up 5 minutes down the road from campus, so I am born and raised in Durham, and I love talking about the area.
Awesome. Victoria.
Hi everyone, I'm Victoria Hill, Assistant Director of Admissions at Fuqua. I've been here for almost 5 years, loving every second of it. And my fun fact is that I am a fitness junkie. I've been practicing yoga for a little over 10 years and can tell you about all the great places to go in Durham.
Thank you. Lauren.
Hi everyone, my name is Lauren Sutherland and I am a Director of Admissions here at Fuqua. I have been working in the admissions office since 2015 and it goes by really fast, just like your 2 years at Fuqua will go by really fast. I've been racking my brain on a random fact that isn't already published on a blog somewhere for Fuqua, hence the 2015. It takes a little while, but Jessica inspired me with the City of Medicine, so here is a new one. When I was in high school, I was a volleyball player, and one of my teammates accidentally broke my nose.
Oh.
In the middle of play. So I ran to the locker room, and in the back of my mind, I had this story about a baseball player who was very famous in the 1990s, Cal Ripken Jr. Mm-hmm. He had his nose broken, and he reset it in the locker room. And so I looked in the mirror and was like, I can do this, because the pain was so great. So in the spirit of the City of Medicine, I was destined to be here. I reset my nose. I did not go back out onto the volleyball court, but it gave me some confidence, like, maybe I could go into the medical field. That didn't work out, but I'm here in the City of Medicine, so, you know, all's well that ends well.
Oh my gosh, Lauren.
I know, surprise. A new fact for you all, too.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh, I don't know that I could top that. Oh, okay. All right. In the spirit of the Bull City, my family grew up here in Durham. And I should say I grew up here in Durham. My family's from a smaller city. And my mother used to work at the old Durham Bulls ballpark in downtown Durham, which is where the Durham Bulls used to play. And she worked there at the time that they were filming Bull Durham.
Oh, cool.
So if you happen to watch that movie, you should look for a very small, fair complexion girl with ponytails. Because I am in the crowd somewhere, and that is my claim to fame. I am a movie star. Just
now everyone can say they know you.
That is it. That
they
is
see
it. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about what we're looking for in the application. I think this is a really good tone to show you that we're really wanting you to present your best authentic self. We enjoy connecting with you, learning about you in your application. And so this process allows us to learn so much more about you in different components, beyond just what you can do in the classroom, but also the value add that you're going to bring to our community. But your journey starts in the classroom somewhat through your undergraduate experiences and also with your test score. So Lauren, let's talk a little bit about the academic component of the application, which is absolutely everybody's favorite.
Everyone's
They love
favorite.
talking about tests, but it's not just about the test. It's about their entire academic profile. So can we talk about that a little bit? What exactly are we looking for?
Yeah, that's a great intro to the academic section. It's made up of a few solid components that you mostly cannot change because this is a look back at your past as a student and a little bit at your current performance as a student regarding a standardized test. But what we're looking for is confidence that you'll be successful in this next academic journey. And that does not look like straight A's throughout undergrad. I don't know that any of us around the table can make that claim. It also doesn't look like a perfect score in one 4-hour sitting during a standardized test. We look for trajectory, we look for trends. Really, we're rooting for you and are looking for any reasons to vouch for you that you'll be successful while you're here at Fuqua.
Very good. So I think a lot of people have questions about what exactly are you looking for on my transcript. Maybe I performed really well as an undergraduate student. I've also done some graduate work as well. Or maybe my undergraduate GPA isn't as strong as my graduate GPA. But how do we assess all of their academic work?
So this is a good news, bad news sort of situation. We only score an undergraduate GPA because that is what all applicants are going to present to us, and that's what's required in order to apply to Fuqua, is having a bachelor's degree or being in the process of completing it and having it completed before you would start. So that's what gets scored. However, everyone around the admissions committee table is human and are looking for those trends. And if you have a graduate degree or you have some graduate classes or courses outside of your undergraduate experience, if that is a better indicator to us of your ability to be successful, we're noting that. The irony about the academics is it's not everyone's favorite. It's everyone's least favorite, for sure. But you spend hours and hours as an applicant toiling over this, and it is important, but it takes admissions committee members 5 minutes to review your entire academic history, not because we don't care, because it is one of the more standardized pieces of the application, but we also recognize it's the part that you can't change. And so we gather information from that section, but then are looking to verify it throughout the other components of the application. So if it's causing you worry, know that there are other ways that you can make up for that throughout the process. And if you had a wonderful academic experience and are ready for the classroom component, congratulations. You can just cross this off and not worry about it, because we see from your transcripts the type of courses you took, how you challenged yourself, what was a difficult major, what your grading scale was. We're taking into account a lot more than just that cumulative GPA. Because we know, depending on where in the world you went to school, that doesn't tell us the whole story. Right. And we have to have more context, and we're looking for that from our previous experiences, but also throughout your application.
Wonderful. So the transcript, your academic transcripts, is one component of the academic section. The next is the test score. Yeah. And I'm going to date myself a little bit when I say this, but when I first started working at Fuqua, we only accepted the GMAT. Yeah. That was the only test that was available at the time. And over time, we've transitioned to now accepting 3 different test scores, the GMAT, the GRE, and the executive assessment. Yeah. I think naturally by default, many people still go to the GMAT, and that's perfectly okay. But there are other opportunities to be able to present how well they can perform in a test setting, also show their quantitative skill set and rigor, and how both their undergraduate experience and what they've done in that test can paint a picture. So let's talk a little bit about the test also. Which test do we prefer?
Whichever one you're best at completing.
Great answer.
And that will vary depending on your background, and many applicants have to try more than one test to find which one really fits their skill set and demonstrates what they need to tell the admissions committee. So we publish our ranges. They vary a little bit year over year, but not that much. And so you want to take the test where you are as close to or above the average as possible, where you're within the 80% range, but most importantly, the one that you feel like you are performing the best at throughout the process.
Wonderful. And then my last question about the academics. Yeah. Can we talk about test score transparency? Sometimes we'll say, you know what, I've taken that test a couple of times. I'm only going to give you my highest score because that's what I'm most proud of. But what do we like to see overall in their score reports?
Yeah. We will take your highest test from one sitting, your composite, but we have always wanted to know the full story behind your test taking. if you've taken the test 4 times, I have never seen it disadvantage an applicant to let us know that. Maybe the test score itself doesn't speak to the ability that you're trying to demonstrate, but it surely speaks to your perseverance and your self-awareness, the things that a test isn't actually capturing, but that will be really important in your success at Fuqua in the classroom and also on the career side of things. So unless there is a really weird anomaly, I'm a fan of you reporting everything that you have done.
Yes.
Just know we'll only take the highest test score from one sitting. And I know there are a lot of varieties of test reports. We don't actually see them from the admissions committee perspective. We only see what you input into your application. So while GMAC is producing a super score this year, we are still using your best composite score. And unless you tell us about your other test takes, we actually aren't going to know that you really did great on quant, and then you started studying the verbal and your quant went down, but your verbal went up. All of those go back to that first point of the admissions committee being human and looking for the reasons that you'll be successful here at Fuqua academically.
Wonderful. I think that goes to emphasize how important transparency is, being very clear in what you've been able to do thus far to prepare for the application process, especially with the test taking component.
And it's such good practice for when you're here and you're working with the Career Management Center or the Office of Student Life. If you wait to get help, it is going to be too late. And so if you're practicing now, some of that vulnerability for some of you, but also just self-awareness and transparency, it really comes back tenfold when you're here in the process.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Okay, now, outside of the academic component, the next big question we get is as it pertains to work experience. Sometimes you might be wondering, do I have too much work or do I have too little? Maybe I've just completed my undergraduate degree 2 years ago and I've been working for the past year and a half, or maybe I have about 8 to 10 years of work experience, a little bit more seasoned in my field, but I feel the need to grow. I feel the need to continue to enhance my professional career. And I believe that the MBA will help me with that. So Suzette, can we talk a little bit about work experience and what we're looking for in an applicant's resume and their professional profile?
Yeah, so one of the things I love about Fuqua is there's really no one type of student that succeeds here. And that means there's really no one type of resume that we're looking for. So there are MBA candidates from such a wide variety of sort of traditional pre-MBA backgrounds as well as non-traditional backgrounds who end up being really successful at Fuqua. What we're really looking for, it's not about a set number of years of work experience, it's about the impact that you've made in those years. So that could be formal promotions and formal managerial responsibilities. It could also just be sort of a through line of gaining trust from your colleagues, gaining additional responsibilities, taking on larger and more complex projects. It's really about that growing impact over the years. So whether you have 2 years of work experience, whether you have 10 years of work experience, whether you are coming from a consulting background or a nonprofit background, it's really kind of that being able to tell that story effectively. And something you'll hear all the time from the admissions committee through your conversations with us is we want to understand 3 sort of big overarching questions, which is, why Fuqua, why an MBA, and why now? And I think all those 3 questions are really important to kind of tie in as threads throughout your resume.
I love your opening sentence because I think it truly reflects the many different backgrounds and experiences of the people in our program. So sometimes people will ask a lot about like student profiles. What's the typical profile of a student at Fuqua? What will help me to be successful? And sometimes they want you to they want to fit into an idea of what that looks like. But if you talk to many different students in our community, you're going to get many different stories and perspectives and backgrounds. So I love and the value of that. Now, because people are coming from different backgrounds, they still have to figure out how they contain all of that information on that one-page resume. So a lot of people struggle with that, and I can understand because you want to make sure that you highlight your impact, but doing it in a way where the admissions committee understands your work and can see your value. How do we guide them, and what recommendations do we give from that perspective?
Yeah, so I think one recommendation that is universal, regardless of what industry you're coming from or what job function you're coming from, is we want to see the impact you've made when it comes to managing people, managing projects, and managing budgets. And you can really get specific. It is great to be humble. You don't have to be humble on your resume. That is the time you want to really showcase the impact you're making. So you can, share specific numbers. How big was the team you managed? How big was the budget that you managed? That's really the time to showcase your accomplishments. I think just as if you were submitting a resume to a professional job, you want to kind of avoid relying too much on like your rote day-to-day responsibilities and more about your achievements. So I think those are kind of some universal guidelines, regardless of what background you're coming from. And again, kind of that through line. So ideally, there's sort of an escalation over the trajectory of your career where you're taking on increasing responsibility.
Wonderful. Now, because they have a space constraint, we generally have some recommendations of things to leave off of the resume to help make sure that they have enough space to share those things that you just mentioned. What's one thing you would recommend that they not include?
Too much industry jargon. We don't need to know like all of the nitty-gritty details about the industry you work in. I think just like a high level explanation where necessary is helpful. But the most important thing is that evidence of leadership. So, you don't have to go too in the weeds as to what you're doing day to day.
Wonderful. Lauren and Victoria, I'm going to put you on the spot. What would you recommend they not put on the resume?
No picture and nothing from high school.
Okay, very good.
Mine would be, you don't need to have a personal statement on your resume. We know that when you are creating this resume that your goal is to get into an MBA program, and that's often takes up a good chunk of space somewhere on that one page. And so feel free to just kick that off. We know what your intent is.
Wonderful. Now, the work experience has a natural connection to your recommender, the person whom you should reach out to be able to share their impression of whom you are as an employee, as a team member in a professional setting, and the value add that you can bring to an MBA. So Suzette, can we talk a little bit about the letter of recommendation as well?
Yes, certainly. So we always recommend you ask a current immediate supervisor for your letter of recommendation. We also understand not everyone is comfortable sharing their MBA plans, especially if you're starting, a year in advance. So it is completely fine to ask a previous immediate supervisor as well. We will not hold that against you. A lot of people, I think, make the mistake of thinking the higher the title in the company, the stronger the recommender. That is a common mistake we see people make. But we're really looking for someone who can speak to your day-to-day strengths as a professional and your potential to be a great member of Team Fuqua. So I think kind of focusing on that credibility piece, right? Someone who's worked with you directly day in and day out and can speak to why you are a joy to work with, why they trust you, how you are an excellent problem solver. I think also avoiding making that process too transactional. So you don't want to reach out to your recommender 2 weeks before the letter is due and say, please, can you write this for me ASAP? I would recommend reaching out at least like 6 weeks in advance and ideally scheduling time to actually have a long conversation with them in person or over Zoom and really be able to explain your reasons for why an MBA, why Fuqua, why now, so that they can be better equipped with that context to write an effective letter of recommendation. Because it's not just about singing your praises and why you're so great, but also why your goals for getting an MBA sort of makes sense with your current job responsibilities and just being able to square all of that together and tell that story.
Wonderful. 2 things. I think it's important to note we want them to have those intentional conversations, like in person or via Zoom or via an intentional phone call, because we don't want them to actually write down anything, because sometimes your recommender may actually take your words instead of using their own, right? So be mindful of not doing that, with the exception of maybe an updated resume or something that kind of shows some insight into why you're pursuing an MBA. There's one thing that I also want to say. If you started your application and you're still working on the other components, you can go ahead and let your recommender submit it today.
Yeah.
Meaning they can submit it early, even before you have submitted your application. We'll hold on to it and we'll pair it once we have received all the components that you're responsible for and make sure that everything is processed to completion so that we can review.
because it is the piece that holds up applications from being completed and being evaluated 9 out of 10 times. It's the recommender.
Yes.
And this might open a can of worms, but in the spirit of talking to your recommender and providing them examples, this past year with the rise of AI, we saw a lot of AI generated recommendations that weren't really specific. And you can't fault a recommender for using a great tool that will make them a really good writer. But I think it went back to show when you have that conversation with your recommender, asking if they have time to create a good recommendation. Maybe it's not even saying like, can you write a recommendation, but do you have time to highlight specific examples? I think that onus is now more on applicants than it's been in the past because of the tools that are available that are making some letters of recommendation just a little less helpful than they've been in the past.
Thank you. When they're starting the application, Suzette, they have to enter in their interviewer's information. Once they do that, what happens? What type of information is provided to the recommender?
So they will be sent an email invitation to complete the letter of recommendation. There is a standard set of questions that every single recommendation writer receives. And from there, they will be able to fill it out and submit it. As Jessica mentioned, they can do that even before you finish the rest of your application.
Wonderful. Very good. Anything else about the letter of recommendation that we should make sure we highlight?
The only other thing that I'll add is that it is the GMAC common letter of rec that we will be sending to them. So if you know that you are about to go into a conversation with the person you're asking, it can be really nice to look over that form ahead of time. That way you have a great idea of exactly what they'll be asked to talk about. And especially if it's a previous supervisor, you can then tie in some examples that maybe they have forgotten about that relate to the questions that they'll be asked to fill out on the form.
Great suggestion, Victoria. All right, we're going to pivot a little bit. We were just talking about the information to include on your resume, maybe also what not to include. But one section at the very bottom, at times, which we see quite often, is where people might share accomplishments, how organizations that they may volunteer with, awards or certificates they might have accomplished, which leads into the leadership, engagement, and community involvement section of the application. See how I did that?
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay, very good. Can we talk a little bit about this section? I personally feel sometimes it's the most underrated section of the application, which is a disadvantage because it actually helps us to understand a lot about what you do, like what you enjoy outside of the chaos of work and everyday life. So can you talk a little bit about this section of the application and the value that it holds?
Yes, so completely agree with you that it tends to be the most neglected section of the application. Every year we see a handful of applicants who leave this completely blank, and it just stabs me through the heart because we really do want to know kind of what you're passionate about and ways that you've impacted the communities you've been a part of. Fuqua is such a community-oriented place with a lot of great ways to be involved, and we want to continue that legacy every single year with each class that we bring in. And so this section gives us a great idea of some of the things that you might end up doing once you're here on campus. I think one mistake that people make is thinking that this can only be volunteer opportunities. So like an official capacity where you have maybe worked with a nonprofit organization or something like that. But there are so many things that you're probably doing that go into this category that you aren't even thinking about. I always tell students that any area where you are creating community is a great thing to include here. So if you host a dinner every month with your friends that's themed, or you're in charge of a book club or a run club, things like that are ways that you're bringing people together, creating community over a shared interest, and are absolutely things that you can put here. So think broader than just actual volunteer efforts. We will want to see everything that you've done in this capacity from all of your undergrad up till now. I know many of us lived through the pandemic, and so you might feel like there's a few years of gap there. That's completely okay. We will not ding you for that. But if you're thinking right now, oh my gosh, I don't have anything to put there recently, now's a great way to start thinking about, what am I passionate about? What are some ways I can make that happen? Even if it's just organizing a happy hour with your coworkers at the end of every week, those are great things to include.
I think that last section, we get that quite often because if you're a consultant, if you're working in finance, those are very long days and long work weeks. And sometimes you just kind of want to decompress on your own, which we completely understand. But there may be ways within your company and in your current role that you're really making an impact and building community, which I think is an important thing to remember. When we think about Team Fuqua, we are a collaborative team. We are a supportive environment. And this section of the application really helps to demonstrate how you do that on your own, but also helps us to see how do you bring those things to our community to help continue to build our team and to make it a safe space and engaging space and one that is supportive for everyone because everyone will bring different components into the program. So I think that's a really good thing to highlight. Are there any no's to the leadership and involvement section? Any things that they should avoid in this section of the application?
Definitely some things you can avoid. I'll go back to my random fun fact. I don't think it would be good to include, I go to yoga every week on your leadership and involvement. I would say if it's more of like a passive personal engagement where you're just doing something on your own and showing up, that probably doesn't fit there. Again, thinking back to ways you're creating community, bringing people together, and being intentional is going to be the better way. I don't know if anyone else has any other examples, but that's what comes to mind.
Yeah.
Anything that you're paid to do, which is a fine line, especially with work engagements. But if you mentor new employees and that's not the focus of your job, I wouldn't consider that being paid to do it. If you have a social media account where you are generating income, that might be an interesting thing to talk about in another section. Doesn't quite capture that community involvement. I liked it's more of a personal engagement, then that's less impactful for us in that section.
Yeah, I think one that stands out for me is if you're fundraising. Sometimes if you're hosting like a big event for like a nonprofit organization and you're trying to raise funds for them, that's different versus if you made a one-time donation to a fund of some sort.
That's a great example.
While that's helpful, it doesn't demonstrate the impact
Yeah.
in comparison to if you're actually hosting a fundraising event for an organization.
Sweat equity has to be there a little bit.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Awesome. So I'd like to talk about the leadership and involvement first because I think it's a great segue also into the essays. Tell us a little bit about our essays as well, because the people really want to know when we're asking about your short-term immediate post-MBA goal, exactly what does that mean? How short is short? How detailed do we want it to be? And then, of course, the random 25 things essay, which is hands down our favorite.
Yes.
Our favorite. and there's lots of questions about the essays. So let's start small with the essays and the short-term immediate post goal.
Yeah.
Talk about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to link back to something that Suzette said earlier. It's really important for us to know why you want an MBA. We want to make sure that it's thought out and you're not just kind of doing this on a whim. And we also want to make sure that Fuqua has the resources to help you actually reach this goal. So it's kind of a twofold thing. It's a pretty short answer question. You don't need to go into a ton of detail. It is completely fine to just say that your post-MBA goal immediately is to work in this specific industry. If you know a little bit more detailed than that and you want to elaborate, you absolutely can. But I think it's also completely fine if you're like, I think I just want to work in consulting, but I don't actually know like the nitty gritty of what I want to do there yet. You can just say that your post-MBA goal is to work in consulting. And then, of course, we want a plan B, right? We know that things don't always work out exactly how we want them to. And so having a plan B, again, shows us that you've been really thoughtful about making this decision to apply to an MBA and that Fuqua has the resources to get you to one of these two goals.
Can you provide a little bit of calmness for the plan B part? Because sometimes people still get really concerned about, but I don't know my plan B, or I think I might want to do this. Is it okay if I tell you that? Like, help to emphasize the importance behind that plan B.
Yeah, so you definitely don't need to stress too much. We are not overly judging what your choices are, right? It's not going to be one of these things where we think, oh my gosh, this student said this in their essays and then they got to campus and decided to do something completely different. So I know that it's a hard thing to think about, but again, we just want to make sure that you're being thoughtful and that you're going to have something in mind if your immediate post MBA plan doesn't work out, it does not need to be a completely different industry or a hard left turn from what you originally want to do. But again, just being thoughtful about what resources are available at Fuqua and how you can get the most out of your MBA experience.
Okay. Breaking news for you. Sometimes you don't always do what you say you want to do in your post-MBA goal. And it's absolutely okay.
Yeah.
If you decide to change. Like I've heard many stories of students who said, I took one class and that one class opened up an entirely different idea of thought for me as it pertains to what I wanted to do with my career and with my MBA. And that's fine. As Victoria mentioned, the most important thing is that you recognize that we have the resources that will help you to be successful, and that's what's most important to us as well.
Yeah, I was going to say too, I think it's okay if you don't 100% know exactly what you want to do yet. Part of getting an MBA is having the chance to explore, take a bunch of electives, get some of that experiential learning, and figure out exactly what the next step in your career is. If you know, I 100% want to work at this company in this role, that's awesome. But you're in the minority of people, I think, coming into this experience. So don't feel like you need to drill down too specific here, or again, that we're going to be upset if things change a little bit once you get on campus.
Wonderful. So now they've been able to clearly articulate their goals. And now they're thinking about 25 things that they want to share with the admissions committee. And sometimes that can be nerve-wracking. And we understand that because everyone at this table has written a random 25 things essay. So you're trying to determine, what do I share? How do I not overshare? But then also, how can I share information about myself that adds value, that really helps them to understand who I am? So let's talk about the random 25 things essay.
Yes, so this is my favorite thing to talk about, I think, in the entire application. It's also my favorite part of evaluating applicants. It is such a nice thing to see your application come to life. At this point, when I'm reading all of the information you've submitted, I've already learned about your academic background, your work experience, and the ways you've been involved in your communities. And so this often helps tie things together and really can help somebody who's reading your application on the admissions committee relate to you and get that kind of human connection out. It is truly random, so we aren't looking for you to include certain specific things. I think some pitfalls to avoid are to not include too many work-related things, right? Make sure that you are utilizing this space and including new information as much as possible. If you want to include one or two work-related facts, you can, but just make sure that they're building context and adding additional information, as opposed to saying, I worked in finance for 5 years.
Right.
We would have already known that from looking at your resume. And so make sure that you're giving us new things. You never know who's going to read your application, right? And who's going to personally identify with something that you're talking about. I think this essay is best when there's a little bit of vulnerability in it and you're willing to share things like family traditions, your hobbies, things you love to do. Avoid doing too many I likes without, again, providing us that context. So if you want to tell me about your favorite book, as a big reader, I'd love to hear it, but I want to know a little bit as to why that's your favorite book. Give me a sentence or two there. And so really kind of helping paint the picture of who you are outside of what you've accomplished is the best thing to do in this essay. We don't always get a chance to interact with you or get to know you personally in the application process. I think we try really hard, but if we haven't had a chance to have office hours with you or meet you at an event, this is the place where your application really comes to life for us, and we can get really excited about advocating for you in admissions committee because we really related or connected to something that you said. I think all of us keep our own lists of our favorite facts or things. I definitely will incorporate traditions, or if you tell me to listen to some music or read a book or read a short story, I'm absolutely doing that as a part of the application process to help get to know you a little bit deeper.
So we want them to be comfortable in their vulnerability, meaning there have literally been times when I've seen a current student and I hear them tell a story or just kind of talk about something that they've been involved with, and I said, and yes, and you also did A, B, C, and D. And they're like, How did you?
It's our superpower.
How did you know?
Yeah.
Because I read your application, and because you mentioned that,
Right.
I remembered, and
Yeah.
it picked up. So the key is to only share information that you don't mind a random admissions committee member asking you about a year or so later.
Regurgitating in front of others.
That's it,
Yeah.
at random. Okay, so what should we avoid? So one of mine is that sometimes you can start very strong in the beginning, and then when you get to maybe fact 17 or 18, you're like, ugh, I don't really know what else to say. So it'll start very strong, but when you get towards the end, it's like, oh, I wish you had given me a little more. So I like to say mix it up
Yeah.
a little bit. Start strong and end strong, and then kind of take us on a little journey in between. What other suggestions do you all have?
I totally agree with what you said, and I often assume when I see an essay like that starts with some hard-hitting facts and then fizzles out towards the end, that they probably sat down and wrote that essay all at once. I think this is a really hard essay to like do in one pass.
Yeah.
When I got hired at Fuqua and got told I had to do this, I remember being like, oh my gosh, I do not have 25 interesting things about myself that I could share, especially with all my new coworkers. And that's a common feeling. It's a little intimidating,
Yeah.
right? So I suggest getting a note app on your phone and kind of add things as you think about them over the next couple of weeks. Ask your family, ask your close friends what's something they would include. That way when you do sit down to write the essay, you'll probably have like 30 facts to choose from and can figure out what are my top 25 most interesting. And then going back to kind of learning how to write an essay in grade school, starting with something strong and ending with something strong helps tie a nice bow on your essay for the reader.
Wonderful. Suzette, any suggestions?
As far as things to avoid, I would say, so definitely like don't be afraid to stand out. Don't be afraid to be memorable, to be even a little bit strange, because that is wonderful. But just keep it professional.
Yeah.
Don't put anything you would be embarrassed for an employer to know, because we are evaluating your application as a professional. So don't be afraid to stand out, but keep it professional.
Use the full word count. I get really disappointed if a 25 things essay fits all on one page, because that either means I have to zoom in because my eyes are getting old, or you didn't take advantage that this is a 2-page, 750 word essay. Brevity is really important, and elevator pitches will come up all throughout business school. This is the one place where I think brevity is not welcome. Like, we don't get to know you any other way. So use every inch that we give you in this essay.
Yep. Wonderful. Very good. Before we pivot into our next essay, just remember, this is a great opportunity to share information that we won't read in any other section of the application. So you want to be very intentional, really take the time to craft a well-rounded list that helps us to really know who you are. All right, now, the next essay, we ask you to share 3 ways that you'll be engaged within the Fuqua community. Essentially, we want to know how do you want to be impactful? Like, what type of community member and team member do you desire to be, and how will you do that here? So talk a little bit about that as well.
Yes, so similar to the leadership and involvement section, this really helps us to envision you here on our campus. I know I mentioned before that we are such a community-oriented place with a million ways to get involved in activities that you can partake in, and that's something that's really important to the culture here. And so we've learned a little bit about what you've done in your past. This helps show us what you're going to do in your future here on campus. And if you have had a volunteer opportunity in the past or something that you've been really passionate about, and that's happening here on campus now, it's a great way for you to tie in that you've done your research on Fuqua and you can continue what you've been passionate about and bring that here to us on campus. I think that, oftentimes I get asked, well, if there's 5 things I really want to do, can I include them? You absolutely can. You just want to avoid it being a little too listy or like listing out 5 clubs you want to be involved in, giving us again a little bit of that context as to why and what you're excited about specifically about being involved in an organization, in an experiential learning opportunity. Or if you want to expand something that's already here, talking to us a little bit about that really helps us imagine who you'll be as a student walking in these halls.
I love that you highlighted the natural connection between your leadership and involvement and this particular essay, because depending upon what you're doing in your own personal time, there are so many things and jewels there that you can hopefully connect to our community in a way that is natural. So that means you'll be an active community member because you've identified ways that you know that you can add value. Lauren, what thing would you recommend, what approach perhaps should they not use in writing this essay?
Asking AI to write this essay.
Yes.
This is the other piece of the application, the recommendation, and then this second essay, where things start to sound really, really similar across applicants. And we have so many diverse ways of getting involved that this shouldn't be similar across thousands of applications. So good approaches to researching this essay, reading the Daytime MBA student blog, talking to students or alums, attending virtual sessions, even if it is in a static way where you're just gaining information, you're hearing how people talk about the Fuqua experience, especially if it's student-led. To be able to better envision yourself here, there are so many resources to research, and AI is a great one to do research, but make sure that you're also putting your own spin on it and that you're being a little bit more dynamic with how you approach the essay rather than just waiting for information to come to you.
Yeah. AI can be helpful. It can also be very hurtful with your
Yes.
application. Because I
Yes.
love the fact that you highlighted that not a lot, but a number of applicants used an AI tool for this essay. We trust that you have written these authentically. But there's a difference in the tone between the random 25 things and this
Right.
essay, which kind of lets us know, you know what, they might have had some additional assistance with this one because the authenticity just doesn't resonate and the flow of the essays are also very different. But we also want to note AI can sometimes give you incorrect information. So I Googled like different types of student, not Googled, I went to AI and I said, hey, what type of different student clubs do we have at Fuqua? And it gave me some that were correct and some that did not exist.
And haven't for years.
Yes.
It can dig so
Yes.
far back into
Yes.
the archives.
Yes. And so you want to be mindful as you're approaching this process and doing your research that you are using credible resources.
Yeah.
So to Lauren's point, making sure that you are reading the blogs, looking at the different club organizations and their websites and getting intentional, purposeful information that will show that you have done the work and that AI did not do the work for you.
Something you'll hear when you're here as a Fuqua student, we're not anti-AI. We want you to use the tools that are available, but what distinguishes you from an applicant that may not be admitted to Fuqua is using that judgment of researching, fact-checking, showing that your voice is still there and the information is correct, regardless of how you obtained the initial information.
Yep. Using AI to clarify, not to create.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, last thing. There's an optional statement.
Yes.
People can use it if they need to provide additional information, maybe gaps in work experience, perhaps maybe not as strong of an academic performance during a particular semester. What's the best way to approach this in determining if I should submit an optional statement? The keyword being optional.
Yes, it is truly optional. So there are plenty of applicants who don't put anything here, and that is completely okay. I know everyone gets hung up on that word optional and thinking that we're trying to trap you. In general, we are trying to advocate you and are on your side more than you realize. So I always tell students this is a great place to include an answer to any question that might naturally come up when we are reading your application. If you have a gap in work experience, if you had a really rough semester in undergrad, or maybe some circumstances that happened at any point in your life that you think are really important for us to know to help explain something, even if you are struggling with that test, like Lauren had mentioned earlier, and you've taken it 4 times and your score maybe isn't quite where you want it to be, you can tell us about that and point us to the quant work that you're maybe doing in your current role to help kind of fill in those blanks and tell your story better. If there is anything that you think we will be like concerned about or have pause about, go ahead and tell us the answer in the optional essay. Naturally, we will fill in that blank for you. And so you're probably in a much better position to do that yourself than to have us default to whatever our assumption would be.
Wonderful. Before we pivot to talking about the interview, I want to ask one more question. Victoria, you are still in the hot seat. one of the things that we've observed from the Random 25 Things Essay is that a lot of our applicants had very meaningful and personal facts that they wanted to share. But there was a limitation of space. They couldn't go into the amount of depth or detail that they would have preferred. Hence, we now have what we call the lived experience section of the application, where they can provide more context into their background and an experience that is impactful for them. So can you talk about that a little bit as well?
Yes, so this is another optional section, but I think most everybody probably has something they can put here if they reflect on it. It is optional, and it does take a little bit of vulnerability. So again, completely fine if you don't want to put anything here, but all of us have had a plethora of life experience that have shaped who we are, shaped the decisions that we have made and will make. And so this is a great place to elaborate on that, give us that context. Naturally for me, I would probably talk about being a first-generation college student and how working in undergrad and how that kind of shaped my outlook on life. It doesn't have to be something like that. It can really be any experience you've had that you think has changed you or helped you grown as a person. Because again, we want to know your whole story, right? So if there's something after you've written your 25 things where you think, wow, I didn't get a chance to fully tell this, and this is really important to who I am, this is a great section to add those things.
Wonderful. And a reminder, that section is optional.
Yes.
So if you don't feel like you have a lived experience that needs additional information or clarity, you don't feel forced to use it. Only use it at your discretion and if you're comfortable with providing that additional context. Wonderful. All right, Lauren, now I'm going to pivot over to you. The last section of the application is the admissions interview. We've made a few changes over the past year or two as it relates to what our interview policy is, but let's talk a little bit about the interview. How do they prepare for it? Whom might they be interviewed by, and what's our current interview policy?
Okay, so I'll start with the middle question, who you may be interviewed by, because that will help you in your preparation. So our second year student interviewers are called admissions fellows. They conduct all of our interviews that are on campus and many that are done virtually. We also have alumni interviewers who help us conduct our off-campus virtual interviews. So if you elect to come to campus to do your interview, we'd love to see you. It is not required. We aren't telling you a story on this. You should interview in the format that works for you for a variety of reasons. But if you come on campus, you're going to interview with a student. So how you prepare for that is slightly different because you won't know who you're interviewing with until they come and greet you in the lobby. So the types of questions that you should ask should be relevant to any student who is interviewing you. Not things that you can find on the internet, not about the cost of attendance or things that you can talk to admissions about, but things about the student experience. Regardless of your interview format, you should be ready to talk about your resume. Anything that you have listed on there is fair game for your interviewer to ask you about because the resume is the only piece about you that your interviewer has. So if you mention that you speak conversational Spanish and your interviewer happens to speak conversational Spanish, they might ask you about that. So it's a good gut check to make sure that you're ready to talk about all those other interests that you list on your resume. And if you're interviewing virtually, the format is obviously different. You'll interview via Zoom or Teams or some sort of video platform. But the other piece that's a little bit different is that you know who your assigned interviewer is. It will be in your admissions portal. This does not mean that you should creep on them and learn everything about their life. However, it is a little bit of a missed opportunity if you don't take the 30 seconds to look them up on LinkedIn. Find out what industry they came from, what industry they're in currently, if they're an alum, so that you can be thoughtful in the types of questions that you ask. Our interviewers are not going to creep on you either. They are just going to wait for that resume to review, to ask you questions. So what you talk about in your interview should reflect what's in your application, but know that your interviewer hasn't seen your application. So what might seem like you're reiterating information is actually new and important context for your interviewer in terms of your story, your background, why you want Fuqua, why you want the MBA, and why now are all things that should be in your application, but also come back up in your interview.
I want to highlight the importance of having an updated and clear resume, because not only is it
Yeah.
important for your application, but it's also important for the admissions interview.
Right.
And you also want to make sure that you have the same information, right? So the interviewer should have the same resume that the admissions committee has, and we don't want discrepancies there.
Yeah.
So if there have been changes in your work experience, maybe you received a promotion or you've been assigned to a different project, make sure that we all have the same updated resume.
Right. And we're not trying to trick you when we ask you to upload your resume in preparation for the interview. We want it to be the same. It's just a slightly different format. Your interviewer doesn't have access to your application, so they can't see that. So we need you to upload it so that your interviewer can actually access it. We're not looking for a whole new updated resume in that regard.
Wonderful. And then Lauren, we have application rounds,
Yeah.
and then we have an interview period for each round,
Yes.
which is something that we have changed to
Yes.
recently, which causes, I think, a lot of anxiety for a lot of
Sure.
people. So let's kind of bring them down a little bit and help them to understand what our interview policy looks like.
Right. We issue interview invitations on a rolling basis, which again is not meant to trip you up or to indicate where you are in the admissions process. There's no hierarchy of the rolling interview decisions. That simply is a function of when the admissions committee is able to obtain your completed application. So once your recommender has submitted their recommendation and everything is complete, and our readers evaluating your application. So you can hear from us at any point after you get the confirmation that your application is complete and is being moved into review until that final interview decision date that we publish for each round. I know you'll read into it, even though we'll say time and time again, you shouldn't read into the timing, but you will hear from us at different points. So please don't let Reddit or GMAT Club or Clear Admit, any of those message boards put you into a spiral. It's simply that your application hasn't been reviewed yet by our admissions committee in full. We do, depending on when you get your interview invitation, you'll have approximately 10 days to complete your virtual interview because there's a little bit less travel and scheduling required for that. We give a little bit more time for those of you who indicate you want an on-campus interview because we know you have to plan to travel to Fuqua. You'll still be in control of scheduling what that date is. And the dates that are offered are listed in the application. So be thoughtful about what actually will work with your schedule, with all of the variety of deadlines that you're likely going to be up against. But know it's a rolling basis. You will absolutely hear by the final date that's published, but you may not hear much before that. Which doesn't mean you're doing poorly in the process. It just means we haven't evaluated your application yet.
Wonderful. And just to reiterate, we have no preference for which interview format you choose.
At all. Similar to the test score that you choose to submit, we want you to select a format where you feel most comfortable and you will be prepared. If you select virtual, approach it as though you were interviewing in person. Don't have a second screen up with prepared questions and answers. Have your resume, have some notes, but if you want to take notes during the interview, I'm dating myself, but you should use a pen and paper. It is really distracting to our interviewers if you start typing. So approach both formats the same way in terms of the relational ability that you have to connect with your interviewer and also to give them some confidence that you are fully tuned in and are paying attention to the interview.
Wonderful. So we've talked about all 6 components of the application. It is a lot. It is a lot to process. And it is not a rush job. For that reason, this is why we always recommend that you apply when you're ready, when your application will be the strongest. For some, that might be early action. For others, that might be round 2. So one question that I'll pose to the table before we prepare to close out today, when is the best time for someone to apply?
I'm happy to answer first. The best time for you to apply is when you're ready and when your application is at its strongest. If you are targeting round 1, but that date rolls around and you're still struggling a little bit with the test score, you still haven't worked up the confidence to ask your recommender, it is completely okay to wait and hit submit in round 2. You will always be in the best position to hit submit when your application is at its strongest, as opposed to rushing to meet an earlier deadline.
Wonderful. Suzette, once someone has hit submit, can they provide us new information?
Yes, you may submit an updated test score up until we recommend within a week of that final decision deadline of whichever round you are applying in. You may also submit through your applicant portal any promotions you may have received at work, any exciting new roles you've taken on in your community, or anything that might add to your overall profile as a candidate.
Wonderful. And then Lauren, once someone has hit submit, what happens next?
You sit back and relax and don't worry about a thing. And we take on some of that worry. So we have a team that will check your application to make sure all the components are there, that the admissions committee needs to evaluate it. Then it is sent and picked up by one of our admissions readers. We have a team of about 25 people who are reviewing applications, putting their notes in. Then the committee, a group of anywhere between 5 to 10 people, reviews those notes, says yes or no on an interview decision, and then your application's read in full again after your interview decision has been released. Then that group of 5 to 10 people will talk once more about your application in full now that we have the in-person and the on-paper experience. And then it's talked about for another 1 to 2 weeks before a final decision is released. We know it's not nearly the amount of time that you put in to putting your application together, but we do take a lot of care in the review process with the 2 separate readers, with 2 or 3 different admissions committee meetings to review and hopefully make sure that we haven't missed something about you and your candidacy for Fuqua.
Wonderful. So the key takeaway that I would love for everyone to remember is that we are very intentional with our application review process.
Yeah.
But also we know that you've put in a lot of work and energy and effort into presenting your best authentic self to the admissions committee. And we want to honor the work that you've done, which is why there are so many different steps and components to the process, and why there are so many different people reading your application and hearing about you. It's never a one-stop shop.
Right.
Your application will be reviewed by many different people in many different committees, and we want to make sure that we check all the boxes and make the best decisions for our class and make decisions that are in the best interest of our applicants as well. So once you have decided that you're ready to hit submit, just trust the process. We know that can be hard, but trust the process and know that we are looking for reasons to admit. We are not looking for reasons to deny. Ultimately, there are so many resources that can help you to navigate this process. Make sure that you attend admissions events, virtual or in person. You'll have the opportunity to meet us in person, talk with members of the admissions committee in real time, and learn information that can be helpful to you. If you can't attend in person, there are many virtual events. There's lots of information on our website, student blogs. YouTube has a plethora of videos that you can watch, different social media accounts as well. There's lots of information there. Take what you need, process what you can, and use all of that information in your application to show how you're going to be a fantastic team member for Team Fuqua if you are admitted into our program. Thank you all again so much for being here today. And thank you all for joining us. We wish you the absolute best as you are putting the final touches on your application or that you're just starting. We're excited that you have started out on the right foot to connect and engage. Continue to message our admissions office. We're available via phone or email, and we look forward to connecting with you all again soon. Take care.